actually familiarized with this subject. So, however, from the very question put forth by Ronald Coase in 1937, this question becomes very important. That the question is not what is actually a market to do. The question is something different. He was asked a very interesting question that, suppose if market can do everything good and everything go well in the market, then why in the real world firms do exist? This is the question. In fact, this was the question he asked in his one of the very important, yet it was not so coherently written paper, but it is one of the best cited paper of Ronald Coase. That is, he asked this question: why do firms exist? If the market can actually work, market can in fact do everything. Okay, so this question in fact created a lot of discussion only after 1950s, but the paper was turned up in 1937, but the paper was being discussed or started discussing only in the late 1950s and 60s. So the question remained very important, because the same is in fact maybe he got inspiration from the work of Frank H. Knight and his risk and uncertainty in profit. In fact, helped him to articulate this question. That is what many people think about. Even that is, market cannot function very smoothly, or most often what happens is that in the real world there are non-market institution or extra market institutions are always in place, because your market conditions, everything is actually not works in a perfectly competitive environment. So the real world is non-perfectly competitive environment. Therefore, there are so many other things are actually involved. So this is the outset in which this particular question of why do firms exist in the real world made its own point. So that is why he asked this particular question in his paper, and that question was taken out by many economists and worked on the reasons in which why this particular things are in place in the economic research. And of course, in the late 1950s, there is a host of literature which was in fact took coup from the paper and started proliferating in the literature of law and economics, and later the industrial organization. And later the same person was actually asked another question. Now this is about the theory of firm and organization, but in 1959-60 he asked another question through his paper that if there is no right exist, then no, if the to put it in a different sense, so if people are very good behavior, having individuals are actually working in the real world, transacting or interacting each other, then why actually all this institution matters, such as property right, contract, or marriage, legal system, all this is matters. Why this sort of institution in fact matters if people are good? Why do all this institution exist? This is another set of questions he was trying to put out in the paper called The Problem of Social Cost. So this is in fact the paper which is in fact laid the foundation of law and economics as a discipline. So earlier a paper in fact talked about the theory of industrial organization. Idea that is he was asking in the paper, or roughly he mentioned in the paper, was later got prominence in the second paper and other subsequent literature in the law and economics. That is why this is very, very important. The first paper, 1937 paper, in fact mentioned about the transaction cost. So this is actually the most important concept in which the whole set of discipline is basically working on. So in the law and economics, or the existence of any institution such as formal versus informal institution, is because of there are so many transaction costs involved. Now, what is this transaction cost, and the difference between the transaction cost other than the externality question is a very tricky one. So normally people would say that externality is something to do with the production and consumption. That is the additional cost inflicted upon the society when some private individual consume or produce. So this is what is actually termed as externality. So you cannot, in fact, price that sort of a cost under the commodity pricing. So this is what is stand out as externality. Then what is actually this transaction cost is all about? Now, we know that in the context of economic understanding, it is not only the production and consumption always deals with the economic life, but also the exchange and distributive aspect, which is in fact act as the pillar or bridge the production and consumption. So exchange as well as the distributive aspect, in fact, play a very crucial role. That is why this sort of function always comes with the idea called the transaction cost. This is what is, or it is a cost of governance in that sense. So now, if you have institutions, then definitely institution must comes with a set of costs, which is called the transaction cost, which is in two ways. It will help. One, it reduces the existing system of transactions or the governance cost, or it also inflict a cost upon results, a kind of understanding which is later very prominent in economics, which is called the market failure sort of literature, or the idea called market failure. So the market failure is, in fact, in that sense, is due to this kind of externality or existence of transaction costs. So law and economics in that sense is talking about a formal system of institution. It is also talks about the social norms and other things, but I'm not very much concerned today about all that informal institution. So we know that in the real world, our economic transaction or buying or selling or consumption of the resources is also based on certain norms, certain sentiments, certain kind of legal binding, etc. So all this is, in fact, makes us our transaction possible. So this is actually the key of or the introductory understanding of why we do really need to study formal institutions or for informal institutions such as norms or something like that. For example, a very interesting article which was written by Kaushik Basu way back in 1980s in EPW, saying that why people are actually not running away even after they reach their destination by hiring a car or hiring an auto or something like that. So this is a very interesting question. People hire an auto or something, and they go to a place, and once their destination is reached, then why still they are actually paying? This is according to the mechanical way of applying the human intellect, that is, if you maximize your utility and then you won't actually pay anymore other than that. So if that is the logic, if you apply, then once you reach your destination, then you need not to basically pay, because your destination is arrived and your utility being maximized. Now, if that is the case, then the other person would be losing. So this is actually a breach of the moral trust which the person has actually taken you to there. So this is one way of looking at. Or even if you have even if you devise a mechanism which is actually you pay upfront and then you wish to go to a place, the same problem prevails. That is, if the driver gets his money or her money in the upfront, then why should that person take you to basically the destination? Because logically the driver is already maximized his or her utility, and why should then they bother to basically take you to some place. So these are actually the real question of moral sort of institution play a very crucial role even in the economic formulations or the economic behavior. To that means mapping economic behavior always comes with this sort of sentimentality. So this is the rough idea behind the informal institution and its importance in making the market more functional. So that is one way of looking at it. At the same time, you also have other set of issue that why you need actually the formal institutions such as law and different kinds of law or legal institution, courts, and arbitrary system, or what you call the legal institution per se. Or you can also ask why we need government, why we need other kinds of, why we need committee, Sharia law, or whatever, any kinds of legal system. Why you need really that when your market can, if there is no problem. So these, and the role of the legal institution therefore is very, very important. Now, when you look into the Indian context, if you, as a beginning point, so if the Indian system of sociality or Indian social system is basically divided into different sort of segmentations. You have divisions of law, you have divisions of caste, you have divisions of religion, you have divisions of gender and other kinds of again you have divisions of language. All kinds of divisionalities exist in the country like India. So if once you have all this divisionality, then the question is that fair or kind of mechanically it happens. So in reality, what we understood is that it is not going to happen in a very mechanical market kind of one size fit type of a logic. So therefore you need a constitutional framework or kind of a formal system which will ensure that there is a minimal standard to be kept, or there should be some sort of a minimality should be maintained. So this is why the constitutional economics comes in, or the legal economics comes in. So the role of judicial institution in that sense plays a very crucial role as a institution, one of the institutions. So I'm not going to the details of all the institution. I'm picking up only one institution, which is called the legal institution, and how the legal institution in fact act in that kind of framework. So the theoretical basis of the law and economics I have already talked about. That is what I felt. What I said is actually hello. Yeah. The legal actually start with this analysis. So the analytical framework, as I said in the very beginning, that it is basically based on the idea called the transaction cost phenomena. So the transaction cost is nothing but the governance cost. So in order to make the economic transactions more and more feasible to all others, we used to have a sort of a framework to minimize this sort of transaction cost. Now, there are different type of proposition in which people can argue for. For example, if there is a zero transaction cost, what happens? Now, according to Coase, if there is no transaction cost, that is, there is no cost of governance between two individuals' interaction, then there is no point of actually even having an institution, because the two individuals themselves would sort it out their commodity transaction. So that is why he says that bargaining will lead to an efficient allocation of resources regardless of what the law is. But on the contrary, if transaction cost is positive, then this is not going to happen. This is also interesting to remind or recall the idea which Hobbes was trying to formulate in the 16th century or 17th century itself. That is, if people are nice and all, then why they are actually, why there need a social contract to have a leviathan, to put it in an opposite sensibility. But other than if otherwise is, then as he put out that people are basically brutish, nasty, and they are not well behaved, kind of. So in that context, it is always a leviathan can basically rule the system. That is why the social contract been derived. So this is actually a very interesting way of looking at it. That is, if institution, or what we call the legal framework or property rights, contracts, everything matters if and only if the transaction, the governance, the cost of governance is positive. Otherwise, there is no point of basically having all this kind of institution. Then it is a kind of an ideal situation, which we had already seen in the perfect competitive environment, where information between two individual or the two party are very symmetric, and they can basically know each other, what is the price and what is everything a priori, and they can definitely do their business. So that is not the real world. The real world comes with all kinds of information asymmetry in that sense. And the moment you say information asymmetry, then other mechanism is required or mandatory to basically address this problem. Then definitely, naturally, it comes with a cost. So who will govern this, and how do you govern, and who will bear the cost, etc., will be the kind of question immediately pop-ups. So if that kind of things comes up, then you cannot simply wish away the cost of transaction in that sense. So therefore, if there is a positive transaction cost, definitely all kinds of institution into real world is going to matter. And that is actually why the formal or the informal institution basically play a very crucial role in making economic transaction. And obviously, when I am talking about development, we are also trying to see that the existing system has to move from one stage to another, or a better stage. That is what we all trying to speak in terms of development in that sense. So then some sort of a deliberation is in fact necessary, because world as we conceptualize is imperfect, and definitely because of the imperfection there would be so many costs, and what ultimately an economist would be looking at is actually maximizes the efficacy or efficiency of this system. So in that sense, so optimization is very important, and we try to bring all kinds of optimization. And that optimization means minimization of your cost, and the cost of governance, as well as the cost of market failure in that sense. So this is what is actually, or how is the economic interaction is basically play a very important role as far as the system is concerned. So with that, let me go to the different aspect of law and economics. So as I said in the very beginning, in the formal legal system, we do talk about the different aspects of law. And in the law and economics, we do have property right law, we have contract law, we have criminal law, we have other kind of family law, then we have regulations, we have all kinds of binding systems. So in that sense, these are basically mechanisms in which, or these are the mechanisms which used to make the economic functionality go well, or the markets function, in fact, a little bit, easier. This market is nothing to do with the perfect competitive market. Okay, so there is always a false notion that we are talking about an equilibrium or something like that in a perfect competitive environment. Sorry, we are not actually talking about a perfect competitive environment, because if there is a perfect the moment I would say that we are talking about a perfect competitive environment, then all this institution become irrelevant. As rightly Ronald Coase pointed out that if there is no transaction cost, there is the institutions such as property, contract, or the law, or a legal system, or even government makes no sense to people. But in the real world, we have actually never been experienced any of that kind. So in that sense, everything is very, very important. Property law is important, contract is important, because you're no longer talks about actually a perfect environment or a system of symmetric information between parties, even between buyers or even between sellers, or between buyers and sellers. So in that context, the property right makes its own relevance. So the property law basically gives a kind of very beautiful narration in that sense. So now, if you don't have a very well-defined property law, it is difficult to basically deal with the production, deal with the consumption, etc. Let me make a point very clear in this sense. So, and if, for example, if I am a producer, I produce, say, X commodity. So my production of an X commodity comes with a lot of factors, right? We know that we need capital, we need labor, we need all kinds of land or whatever natural resources, etc. Now, all these resources are actually comes with ownership in that sense. So ownership of different kind. Now, I'm not going to the details of ownership. No, there are different kinds of ownership which has to be in actually gives you a legitimate sense of claim. Now, unless you have the legitimate sense of claim, you cannot actually have the residue which you have left, or which you may be leaving out after paying everybody. This is actually a very important concept which was mooted by none other than Frank H. Knight. That is, why profit being paid to an organizer. So this is what is actually the question. Whatever is left is going to be the price of the organizer. So, but that is not a sufficient kind of understanding. Even the same question was even mooted by Hart and the recent Nobel laureate Oliver Hart, and they've worked on this aspect of contract and property. Okay, what they had also said, the residual claimant of a firm, because they are actually the owner of that particular means of production. So once they are the owner, then the owner always has to actually claim claim the residue. So this is actually the kind of understanding. So the ownership is actually makes a very important sense, and that comes with the property right. Now, if you don't actually have a well-defined property right, it is difficult to basically have an economic transaction per se. So whether you talk about in terms of production or in terms of consumption, that makes no sense if you don't have actually a kind of well-defined property right or property law. Now, that well-defined property law can be different kind. I don't actually subscribe to the fact that it has to be private, because I do disagree with this kind of an immediate conclusion that it has to be completely excludable or a rival risk, kind of a definition which has been given by the standard economic sense, because the pure private property is never going to exist, because the very fact that property right has to be given by the person other than the person who is actually owning it. In that sense, always property right is a third party creation. So once you have a third party creation, then the pure excludability and rivalry kind of a clause will never exist, literally, as well as theoretically, it is impossible to exist. So one of my proposition theoretical argument in my own work is basically that it is difficult to basically have a pure private property right, because the very nature of property right itself is non-absolute, so because of many reasons. So now, the moment you say that it is absolute, then definitely you will be ending up with a lot of contradictions and impossibilities. So now, given that fact aside, what I am trying to say is that always property right is important, but I'm not actually subscribing that and a complete property right, private property right, is going to solve the problem, because in the real world you have actually a spectrum of rights. you have a property right which deals with a spectrum of rights. Now you have state which has a very different kind of a property right. And of course, all the private property right has to be given by the state, given the setup, whether it is a monarchy or a democracy or an oligarchy, everything this kind of setup which has to give, or somebody has to give approval, or even the constitution has to give you approval of that kind. So you have a state set of state right, then you have also common pool resources, then you have private right, then you have club rights, you have a variety of different kinds of private rights. And of course, you have no right situations. There is no property kind of situation. So, for example, common resources or pure public good. What do you call pure public good? Now, all this is actually comes with different kinds and the nature of right in that sense. So, but the important aspect is that you must have a sort of a claim right. So then and then only that has to be defined. Otherwise, there is always a trouble. So this is what is actually deals under the theory of property right. Now, this is essential for the kind of economic interaction. This is actually the beauty of the interplay of economics and the legal framework. And what we need to really look into is actually whether we can really address economic development without addressing the issue of ownership. Now, the answer is no, you cannot basically. So in order to basically move yourself from stage A to B, you also need to very categorically discuss with the idea called the property right. So therefore, property right is very, very important in that context. Similarly, in the legal literature, you have contract laws. So what does actually this contract law means? Contract laws also makes you, to have a reliable sort of an economic transaction, because if you don't have a contract, it is basically very difficult to have a sort of economic transaction. So in countries which having a contract law which is less well defined, less strictly enforced, would worry that they would not be able to collect their share. So the contract is in that sense a mutual promise. Often one party does something first and the other party promises to do it later. So it's kind of a sequential kind. So we enter into a contract means that there is a transaction of a commodity from one person to one. That may be one of the reasons we always enter. Now, why? There is also possibilities of breach of contract also. So these all has to be dealt under the legal aspect. And this is also very important to have an economic transaction. Now, you cannot simply say that you can have an economic transaction without talking about a legal definition of a contract or the premise called the legality involved in the economic transaction. So in that sense, a contract is now very, very important. Again, in that also I would make a word of caution that even in that kind of a situation, you must have a sort of a contract which is not necessarily a complete contract, because in real world, as in the very beginning I said, that in the perfectly the world is actually not perfect, that is, it is imperfect, and the symmetry of information is only a sham, and you have always an asymmetry of information between things. And of course, the uncertainty, everything is also do play a very, very important role. Once you have all this kind of uncertainties or imperfections exist in the real world, then wishing that you may be having a sort of perfect contract or a complete contract is not actually logically a plausible kind of assumption in that sense. So in the real world, your contract law is also incomplete. Therefore, you also need to have a sort of an enforceable mechanism to take care of all this kind of an incomplete contract in that context. So there comes the importance of contract law, and you may be having different kinds of rules to deal with this thing. So you need to really have a legal system in order to take care of all. So you not only requires a defined property right, you also requires the due process been actually followed, because in the contract what you do is actually non-party, between non-party and you deal with. Okay, and everything is a priori, maybe they agreed upon, but there are maybe possibilities of actually breach, or there are possibilities of non-performance, etc. in the real. So these possibilities has to be dealt, and therefore a legal system should be necessary, and that legal system has to go with the basically to make the economic development or a kind of an economic actions or transaction possible as well as smooth. So this is actually one of the very important aspect of the interdependence of legality and economic understanding. So as I said, in the case of property, contract is also very essential part. And in this case, both case, it is actually known parties are playing, but there are instances in which an unknown party is also come and play with their real world kind of trajectory. So in that context, there are other system of laws deals with such problem, which comes largely under a tort law. In India, unfortunately, you don't have actually a sort of a well-developed tort law system. Normally, we deal with this kind of a system, that is unknown parties, the interaction between unknown parties under the contract law or in the property law. So it is part of the legal system. But anyway, in the international scenario, tort law is a very important legal framework in which it is basically deals with a lot of issues. So it is basically between the unknown parties, because I don't know when I'm going to meet an accident with somebody else. So the civil wrongs can be between two parties, but these parties not necessarily parties of known each other. So in that context, tort law is basically deals with unknown parties and civil wrongs, and so this is also very important. Again, in every economic activity, this portion of law is a very crucial one, because we know that there are so many economic transaction productions take place, but there are unknown players who are going to affect by certain actions. It is in terms of consumption, it can be in terms of production, or it can be in terms of even distribution or exchange. So every possible economic action, this sort of an unknown person who is not actually directly involved may be supposed to pay or reap a benefit as well as a cost. So in that context, it is also the tortious laws, in fact, deal with this kind of a scenario. This has also traditionally never been conceived under the economic analysis. So in the law and economics analysis or institutional economics, only this kind of analysis hardly spoke about all these aspects. And again, in the real world, you have this kind of an issue also, antitrust law, normally the anti-competitive, because economists always talk about competition. Competition is the price. But in the real world, you have monopoly, monopoly rights and the tacit agreements, etc. are in place. So, which is in fact anti-market, basically. Because any monopoly means it's a concentration of power. But in the real world, all corporations do the same. So in order to control this sort of a concentration, you have antitrust law in America, in India, everywhere. So earlier in India, you have an MRTP Act, Monopoly Restrictive Trade Practice Act. And much before that in United States, so they have Sherman Act, they have Clayton Act, etc. All these acts, in fact, acted as a kind of antitrust act, that is anti-monopoly act. This is for competition, because competition is always good for people and all the consumption or all the consumer or all the producer alike. But it is against the principle of profit maximization, basically. So if you have to basically maximize your profit, you tacitly comes to an agreement, or you make monopoly or kind of a anti-competitive market situation. So this kind of law basically restrict people from doing that. That is also we regards that this is one of the mechanism in which everybody collective welfare can be basically maximized, not necessarily the individual kind of welfare. So this is another set of understanding which is also comes under the legal system, which is essential to have basically economic development. So therefore, antitrust law, or now in India we have a competition law, that is from 2002 onwards you have a competition. On the contrary, we do also have a Patent Act, a Copyright Act, which is basically anti-monopoly. In that sense, it is monopoly acts. So you have one side, you have a clear existence of a monopoly or kind of a Patent Act, and at the same time there is another set of act which is against this kind of a concentration. So you have always in the same system, you have a concentration vis-a-vis an anti-concentration kind of an act in place. So in order to make society better, you do have actually formulate all kinds of this thing, and you need to really study on all this aspect. That is why you have to have a law and economics framework to deal with the blend of all these things. So in a formal sense,
Excuse me, sir.
with the same the case with the, yeah, I'll be finishing with 5 minutes.
Okay.
So
Okay,
the same kind of rigor, you also have criminal activities, especially from the work of Gary S. Becker from 1950s onwards, basically based on his PhD, and all this kind of criminal behavior is also brought out under the framework of analysis. Why people are basically is a crime a rational act? Is crime basically based on sort of economic motive, etc.? So these are also comes under now in the analysis of economics. And of course, you can have a sort of different variety of explanation. I'm not going to the details of the fairness aspect right now, but I can respond to the fairness aspect of that, different kind of fairness aspect, as well as the efficiency aspect. So all this is in fact the study in a context of the rationality of individual and or even the market's existence. This traditionally these kind of activities are actually out of economic understanding, but now everything can be studied because you brought all these aspects under the framework of economics. So you also do have an issue of regulatory frameworks. So why there is a regulation requires now in the post 1980s or 90s, especially in India, it is post 1990s, people are actually laughing at regulation. But in reality, if you look into it, there are different kinds of regulations, newer kind of regulations coming in and playing. Now, the interest is for whom this regulation is playing is a million-dollar question, which I don't ask right now, because that we can actually reserve for a later kind of discussion. So regulatory mechanisms also plays a very crucial role in the law and economics literature. Just like you have a variety of other legal aspects like marriage issues, you can talk about family law, you can really talk about different kinds of legal system, which one is better, etc., under the economic analysis of law and the legal analysis of economics framework, that is called the law and economics framework. And all this is in fact made possible or made materialized because to make the economic interaction for the betterment of human beings. So what I try to make is that, in order to address the question of development, you definitely must have to have a sort of a interplay or interdisciplinary engagement to understand why a particular act is very important. I'm only talking about an institutional interplay with that of the market understanding or economic understanding. But there are so many other things which we can basically bring out to understand economics, and there are so many other newer field which is now turned up, like empirical law and economics and other aspects of real world changes which brought out which is basically bringing under the purview of law and economics for development kind of literature. You have behavior law and economics and other aspects. So I will take some question only in the end if somebody wish to ask or need a more clarification. With that, what I would conclude is that for development, the question of development, which is not the cup of tea of economics alone, but even the economic act, in order to ensure the economic act possible or in a fruitful sense, you need actually other set of institution, and a legal institution is law, or the formal institution is one of that kind. So with this, let me stop my presentation, and I'm very thankful to giving this opportunity to share my thoughts with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you. It was a really a wonderful and resourceful presentation. And I think for all of the audience, it will be really informative, because you have done an excellent in bridging the economics and law. Okay, after the second presentation, we can have the questions. Okay, sir?
Oh, sure.
Oh, okay. Okay, next we have our presentation by Silva Parlima ma'am on the sustainable development. Ma'am, the platform is open for you. Could you please?
Assalamualaikum everyone. Good afternoon. Is it good afternoon, right? In India? Because here in the UK it's still morning. So thank you to Mr. Jassim and also Mr. Ibrahim, who already gave me opportunity to be a speaker in this conference. So can I share my screen?
Of course, ma'am. Of course.
Right. Here we go.
Yes, it is visible, ma'am.
All right. So my name is Silva Parlina, and I'm currently a researcher specifically in Islamic development, Islamic finance development, and I'm currently a practitioner at Islamic Relief Worldwide. Maybe some of you, if you study Islamic finance, maybe some of you ever heard about this institution. And now on this opportunity, I'd like to present about the role of Islamic finance to the sustainable development. So in mid-18th century, there was a big phenomenon called Industrial Revolution, as we all have known. It caused a high output and population, and also like a big or high production in industrial sector. In this modern time, also, economic and development are evolving, and there is a massive technology advancement. And therefore, to answer this phenomenon or the challenge in this phenomenon, the capitalist system always tries to maximizing profit and causing social and environmental damage. As we can see in the picture here, there are like environmental deterioration, and then or environmental degradation, and also like urban dislocation as a result of capitalist system, because they always like increase the production, increase, and then like try to maximizing profit, but they don't care about the social and environmental damage. And as a consequence of this capitalist system, this system can neglecting the human well-being and ignoring the future generation existence, because, you know, when the capitalist system try to maximizing the profit, they just care like money oriented, but they don't really care what's the impact for the environment, for example, and for society. So it creates unsustainable system. That's why, or therefore, to answer the challenge of a capitalist system, United Nations in 2015 create Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs, as probably some of you have heard, because it's quite popular nowadays, and it's a big agenda for all of the people around the world to create a sustainable world in 2030. So on this Sustainable Development Goals agenda, there are 17 goals, as you can see here in the slide, like no poverty, zero hunger, good health and well-being, quality education, gender equality, and so on. And it's mostly related to society, social, environmental, and governance. And as we can see here in the screen as well, to create a sustainable finance, sustainable and responsible investment, established a framework called Environmental, Social, and Governance, or ESG, which means that SRI want to create the investment world concerned with human welfare and focusing on peace, social justice, and a friendly environment. So what is the role of Islamic finance to the sustainable development? Is there any correlation between Islamic finance to sustainable development? So the answer is yes. Let's see here. According to Haraha 2002, Islam is a way of life, which means that we are a human here is Khalifah. It means that we as human must preserve the earth and its resources, because in Islam, we believe that everything comes from Allah, from God, and we should inherit everything in the present life to the next generation. And therefore, the economic activities in present moment, when we do like economic activities, for example, when we do business, when we do a lot of like industrial sectors, we can't just maximizing profit, but we have to, and then like ignoring the existence of our offspring in the future, because whatever we do today, we have to make sure that we will inherit to our offspring or to the next generation in a good condition, and make sure that we concern about their welfare in the future. That's why there is a very urgent needs of a new system called sustainable, which means like you have to preserve whatever we have today so that it's sustained in the future. So Islamic finance, as a different system from conventional, must put Islamic moral economy as a foundation or a fundamental approach, which promoting welfare and human well-being as the highest goal in Maqasid al-Sharia. I think if you study Islamic finance, maybe most of you ever heard Maqasid al-Sharia, and it's quite fundamental in Islamic finance. So in Islamic moral economy, the approach in Islamic moral economy use is individual approach because it is believed in Islamic moral economy that every micro decision which made by one human will create a macro development or like something bigger. So every micro decision will create a macro development or bigger development, which finally will create a sustainable system. So what is the role of Islamic finance to the sustainable development? So in Islamic moral economy, there are we use like one of the important axiom is Maqasid al-Sharia, as I mentioned before, and there are 5 Maqasid Ghazalian framework. The first is preserving faith, and the second one is preserving human self. The third one is preserving intellect. Then the fourth one is preserving progeny, and then the last one is preserving wealth. So as we can see here, the word preserving itself means like we have to preserve everything we have or every resource we have in this earth to inherit it to our next generation, right? So this is quite comprehensive approach that Islamic moral economy has as a fundamental of Islamic finance, and this is very essential and important so that the practice in Islamic finance will based on like will keep in track, not like mimicking conventional system. So here I will give you a role of Islamic charitable sectors in sustainable development. So we will see the reflection first about Islamic finance. According to Islamic researcher, Islamic financial institutions has been successful, right? I think if you read a lot of journal related to Islamic finance, you will find a lot of articles that mention that Islamic Islamic finance is much better than conventional or capitalist system, or Islamic finance has been successful, or Islamic finance is more resilient than a capitalist system, especially when facing the economic turbulences. Also, it has a big contribution to boost economic growth. But actually, so is in Islamic finance itself, the most like the stereotype of Islamic finance mostly dominated with Islamic banks or Sharia banks and financial institutions. So if probably like people talk about Islamic finance, they will mention about like, oh, it's Sharia banks, it's Islamic banks, it's Sharia financial institutions, right? While actually Islamic finance is more than that, is much more comprehensive than that. And however, in practice, if we are talking about Islamic finance institutions or Islamic banks, it seems that in practice, the Islamic financial institutions are trapped to the term economy, which means like maximizing efficiency. So if if you are an economic academics or economic scholars, probably if like the terms of economic itself, like maximizing efficiency, like efficient. So as a result, because of we are trapped to the term like Islamic economic development, for example, the practice of Islamic finance are still mimicking the capitalist system. Mimicking here means like copying the capitalist system. For example, if there is, I will take a good example. For example, Islamic banks, okay? In capitalist system, they have banks or conventional banks, and then Islamic finance, and then we establish Sharia banks. And then if conventional system has stocks, in Islamic finance will created a sukuk. So it means that Islamic finance is not a different or couldn't stand by itself because it's like just copying the capitalist system. As a result or as a consequence of mimicking capitalist system, the Islamic finance is not human-oriented, which promoting by Islamic moral economy as the fundamental of Islamic finance, but it's just still profit or money-oriented, which is just similar like a capitalist system or conventional banks. So in practice, Islamic financial institutions could be called just Sharia in form, which means like following fiqh muamalat, but ignoring the substance or ethical finance as Islamic moral economy expectation. And the common debate of Islamic finance always come back to form versus substance because it's only Sharia in form, but not in substance. I think most of you probably have read about this article. So according to a lot of researchers is that Sharia banks mostly implement the sustainable programs through CSR or corporate social responsibility, which means like it's not a core business of Islamic banks or Islamic financial institution, but it's only a voluntary action. You know, if you see in a corporate or in Islamic banks, they don't have sustainable development as the core value or main agenda, but it's just like they have fund allocation through CSR fund, like as corporate social responsibility, and there is the moment which they will contribute to sustainable programs, but it's only voluntary actions. It's not a core value or main agenda or main framework or main approach in Islamic financial institutions itself or in Islamic banking. So it is believed that for like some researchers, or if we go back to the history, to the Ottoman Empire, Islamic charity organizations considered the most visible Islamic finance as Islamic moral economy expectation promoting sustainable development. So charity organization is the most implemented Islamic finance or Sharia compliance as expected by Islamic moral economy. Are you still with me? Can you still see my screen, right?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Right.
All right. So now I want to talk about, sorry. Here, I want to talk about Islamic Relief Worldwide as an Islamic, biggest Islamic charity organizations in the United Kingdom. So as we can see before, the Maqasid al-Sharia, there are five framework in Maqasid al-Sharia. And it's also mentioned here, faith, life, in preserving faith, life, intellect, posterity, and wealth. So in Islamic Relief Worldwide, you can find this in their institution profile. So here, Maqasid al-Sharia is become the main framework or main approach to create the business development in Islamic Relief Worldwide. So here they have a 5 framework, which is based on Maqasid al-Sharia. And then there is the details in here, for example, like faith. We have right to freedom of worship or freedom of belief. And then life, we have right to food, clothes, and shelter. We have right to health. We have right to life. We have right to live in secure without fearing of any particular communities, for example. We have right to social equality. We are equal as human. We have right for freedom from fear. We have right to a healthy environment and intellect. We have right for education. We have right for capabilities. We have right for like expressing ourselves. So here, we are as human, we have right to live, to achieve human well-being in this world. That's why sustainable development is a big agenda for us. And then Islamic finance already had this idea since long time ago, because because Islamic finance actually already established since 1960s. So it's quite comprehensive approach. I mean, if United Nations created Sustainable Development Goals in 2015, Islamic finance actually has already had this approach of sustainable development since long time ago, before modern history. So here I want to show you the money spending of Islamic relief worldwide in 2020. I just take an example. I took this from the financial report, and you can see from their website as well. So the money spending of Islamic relief worldwide in 2020 is, you can see here, it's like protecting life and dignity, caring for orphans and children in need, providing access to health and water, and just, you can see here, like investment management. So if based on that charities expenditure, which I showed you in the previous slide, I use the Krippendorf method. So I will use the disclosure technique to the Maqasid framework. So for example, here, like protecting life and dignity, and then caring for orphans, I will just transcribe to Maqasid framework or Ghazalian Maqasid framework. So for example, here, protecting life and dignity in Maqasid framework mapping, it will be like preserving life. And then caring for orphans and children in need, it will be preserving progeny. And then providing access to health and water, it's preserving life as well. And you can see here in this table. And then after using that disclosure technique to the Maqasid framework, now we can get here the charitable expenditure in percentage, which means that, and I already put in ascending here, the biggest contribution of Islamic relief worldwide in protecting life and dignity, right? So here I can show you the Maqasid performance, sorry. Now you can see here the Maqasid Al-Sharia performance of Islamic relief worldwide in 2020, like religion, because we are not allowed to like do business, the core business is not allowed to what is that, like something related to faith. So they don't have this approach. And this one, the preserving of intellect is 3% in the summary, and then preserving life is 57%, which is the highest figure. And then the preserving progeny is 28%, and preserving wealth is 13%. So as we can see here, that preserving life, which is the most essential part, is the main contribution of Islamic relief worldwide Maqasid performance in 2020. And intellect probably the least, if or religion is the least figure, as we can see from this table. So what I want to mentioned here. So is there any correlation between sustainable development to Islamic? Is there any roles of Islamic finance to the sustainable development? The answer is yes. Even though if we can see the practice of Islamic finance, which refers to Islamic banks or Islamic financial institutions, they are still profit or money oriented in practice, and then just mimicking the capitalist system or conventional banks or conventional financial institutions. But as Islamic finance itself, through for example, through like I took the example from here, from the charitable organizations, it's been greatly contributing to sustainable development, because especially if you put Maqasid al-Sharia as the main framework or the main approach for the core business development in an institution, which have five framework, like preserving religion, preserving intellect, preserving life, preserving progeny, preserving wealth. The words preserving itself, it means like we have to preserve what we have today and then inherited it to our inheritance in the future, to the next generation, to our child, our granddaughter, to our offspring in the future. So if Islamic finance put Islamic moral economy as a foundation or as the fundamental framework in doing the Islamic financial business, it will contribute to sustainable development like significantly. So that's all from me. If you have any questions, maybe I don't know if there is any sharing session.
Thank you, ma'am. Just a wonderful session. Okay, let's have the question, and if anyone have the question, we will first go for the questions and we will list out the questions. Once the question over, then we will be the speakers will be answering it. Audience, please do not hesitate to ask any questions. If anyone have the question, then you can also put it in chat box also, so that we can see and that the speakers can see and they will be answering it. And one more thing, if anyone have any language issues, you can talk in Malayalam. We will be converting it into English and they will be answered.
Hello, does anyone have a question to Mr. Siddiq Rabit sir? That also can be included in this session. You can ask any questions to both Silva Parlina and Mr. Siddiq sir. You can ask questions and you can raise any comments or suggestions. That also can be considered in this session. So if you have any comments, also you can about the conference, you can also, that also can be encouraged in this session.
Brian sir, we can wait for another 1 or 2 minutes for their question. If there is no question, we can wind up. Isn't it, sir?
Yes, yes, if does not have any questions, we can conclude the session by your concluding words. And yes, we can wait for 1 minute.
I think there is somebody raised her hand, Fatima Angeli.
Jasim sir,
Okay.
maybe we can conclude this session.
Okay. Okay. It was a wonderful session. And we, in this session, we have two speakers, eminent scholars from the two different parts. And they've spoken, especially the Siddiq sir, spoken on behalf of the law and the economic development. He have done very nicely. And we had another speaker named Silva Parlina ma'am, and she also linked the economics and the Islamic finance for this or the Islamic finance, especially in the social development or sustainable development. With us, the time is running out. We are not going to much more. Let me thank our guest for taking our invitation and coming and participating in our session. And let me invite the Ibrahim sir for giving a formal vote of thanks. Brian sir.
Okay, we are going to the concluding session. Before that, one important information. We have circulated feedback form in the chat box. Everyone please requested to fill the feedback form. That can be considered for your participation certificate also. So all are requested to fill the feedback form. Yes, good afternoon to all. It's my pleasure and privilege to stand in front of you all. We, the Department of Economics, Madinatul Arabic College, feel honored and we proud as an organizer of this kind of a conference by including various eminent scholars and speakers from different parts of the world. Actually, now we are running out of the time, so I don't want to prolong my words. Just let me directly enter to the my designated duty. First of all, I would like to extend I would like to thank Mr. Siddiq Rabiat sir, Assistant Professor, Department of Economics, Kerala University, for your kind support and wonderful presentation. And one more thing, we have a collaboration with Interdepartmental Center of Alternative Economics of Kerala University. This is also one is a part of we also extend my thanks to Siddiq Rabiat sir for your kind support. Then I would like to extend my gratitude to Silva Parlina, a researcher and professional at Islamic Relief Worldwide and the scholar of Islamic Finance, University of Dundee, UK, for her wonderful presentation. And I extend my gratitude to Jasim V, HOD Economics, Safi Institute of Advanced Study. And not the last but not least, all the participants who have actively participated in the conference. I, on the behalf of the Department of Economics, I express my gratitude to the all participants who are presented in this conference. Okay, by these words, we are going to wind up this session. First of all, lastly, thank you all.
Thank you for inviting us. Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me as well. Thank you.
Thank
so
you,
much.
thank you, thank you. Just really pleasure to be part of this. Okay, see you.
So my colleague Hashim, say hi to everybody in Kerala.
Okay, okay. Thank you.
Meeting like meeting proceed.